The air in the Harrington ballroom was thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the heady perfume of 100 hothouse roses. A small orchestra played a lively country dance, but Lady Eleanor Vance stood utterly still, a solitary figure in a sea of swirling silks and glittering jewels. Her gown of pale blue silk, chosen to match the forget-me-nots her fiancé, Lord Ashworth, had sent that very morning, now felt like a shroud. Every glance in her direction was a pinprick. The whispers, at first subtle, were growing bolder, sharpened with pity and a cruel sort of amusement. Lord Ashworth was not by her side. He was not in the ballroom at all. The man who had, only hours before, professed his undying devotion in her father's drawing-room had vanished. The news had spread through the ton with the speed of a contagion, carried by fluttering fans and hushed voices. His carriage was seen leaving London. A letter, they said, had been left for her father. Eleanor kept her spine straight, her gloved hands clasped before her. She would not faint. She would not weep. She was the daughter of a baron, raised to be a duchess, they had said, and she would face this public ruin with the dignity of her bloodline, even as that bloodline's future crumbled to ash beneath her feet. Her mother, consumed by a fit of vapors, had been escorted home. Her father was in a corner, his face the color of old parchment, deep in frantic conversation with a solicitor. She was utterly, profoundly alone. Then the music faltered for a heart-stopping moment, and a new energy swept through the room. It was not the excited buzz of gossip, but the electric hush of profound respect, bordering on awe. The crowd parted like a field of wheat before a scythe. He was tall, impossibly so, his form sheathed in impeccably tailored black superfine that did nothing to hide the breadth of his shoulders. His cravat was a masterpiece of stark white simplicity, but it was his face that commanded attention. It was a study in harsh, aristocratic angles, his jaw a firm line, his mouth set in an expression that was not quite a frown, but suggested a deep and abiding disapproval of everything he surveyed. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept across the ballroom, taking in the assembled peerage as if they were an inconvenience he was forced to endure. Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Castleton. They called him the Iron Duke, and not for his prowess on the battlefield, though he had that in spades. It was for the unyielding, impenetrable nature of his character. A man of immense wealth, staggering influence, and a heart, it was rumored, carved from the very granite of his northern estates. He was a widower, a figure of immense mystery, and the most sought-after marital prize in all of England. To secure his attention was to secure a future beyond imagining. And his attention, at this precise moment, was fixed entirely on Lady Eleanor Vance. He did not stop to speak to the eager mothers pushing their eligible daughters forward. He did not acknowledge the fawning lords who sought his favor. He simply walked, his path a straight, determined line through the center of the room. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Was he coming to gloat, to offer some cold, ducal words of scorn for her public humiliation? She braced herself, tilting her chin up a fraction higher. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell the clean, crisp scent of his soap and something else, the faint, bracing chill of a winter night. For a long, agonizing moment he said nothing, his gaze unreadable as it traveled over her face, her rigid posture, the tight clench of her hands. The entire room had fallen silent, the orchestra forgotten. Then the Duke of Castleton did the unthinkable. He executed a bow of such exquisite grace that it was a work of art, and his voice, a low, resonant baritone that seemed to reach out and touch her very bones, broke the silence. "Lady Eleanor," he said, the words carrying to the farthest corners of the room, "I find myself in need of a partner. I trust you will do me the honor of standing up with me for the next waltz." It was not a request. It was a command, a decree, a public declaration of war upon her ruin. Eleanor stared at him, the cold shock of his presence replaced by a dizzying wave of disbelief. To dance with him now, after being so publicly abandoned, was to be plucked from the flames of scandal and placed upon a pedestal. It was an act of salvation so complete, so absolute, that her mind could not grasp it. He extended his hand, not gloved as was proper for the occasion, but bare. The sight of his strong, bare fingers reaching for her sent a jolt of something primal through her. It was an intimacy, a breach of protocol, and a silent challenge to every whispering voice in the room. The orchestra, with a skill born of panic, struck up the opening strains of a waltz. Her hand, trembling slightly, lifted of its own accord and settled into his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, an anchor in a storm-tossed sea. His other hand came to rest on her waist, the touch burning through the silk of her gown. The world, the whispers, the faces, the humiliation, it all receded into a blur. There was only the gray storm of his eyes and the impossible reality of his touch as he swept her into the center of the floor. As they began to move, his voice was a whisper against her ear, so low only she could hear. "You are not broken. Do not give them the satisfaction of thinking you are." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, not from the exertion but from the sheer force of his presence. Why would the Iron Duke, a man who cared nothing for society's games, do this for her, a stranger, a ruined, abandoned woman? "Your Grace," she managed, her voice a bare thread of sound, "I do not understand." A ghost of something, not a smile, but a dark, wry flicker, passed over his features. "I have never had much taste for watching a fox torn apart by hounds." He guided her through the steps with a masterful control that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her body followed his lead as if it had always known the path, even as her mind reeled. He moved with the lethal grace of a swordsman, each turn precise, each step a silent testament to his power. The other dancers had given them a wide berth, leaving them alone in a glittering void, the sole focus of 100 envious and bewildered stares. Eleanor's senses were overwhelmed. The warmth of his hand through the thin fabric of her glove, the firm pressure of his palm on her back, the clean, masculine scent of him that filled her with every breath. This was not the polite, distant touch of a society dance. This was a declaration of possession, a claiming enacted before the entire ton. He held her closer than was strictly proper, his gaze never leaving hers. There was no flirtation in that gray stare, no softness. It was an intense, unflinching assessment, as if he were reading the very depths of her soul and finding it, unexpectedly, acceptable. "You are angrier than you are sad," he observed, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "Good. Anger is useful. Grief is a luxury you cannot afford tonight." His words were like a splash of cold water shocking her out of her daze. What a strange, hard man he was. But he was also, she realized, profoundly right. Beneath the shame, a slow, simmering fury was beginning to coil in her stomach. A fury directed at Lord Ashworth, at his cowardice, at the public spectacle he had made of her. "You presume to know my feelings, Your Grace," she said, a thread of steel entering her voice. The ghost of a smile returned to the corner of his mouth. "I know the look of a woman who has been betrayed by a man she trusted. It is a look I know well." The sentence was laden with a dark history, a glimpse behind the Iron Duke's impenetrable armor. She remembered the whispers about his first wife, the beautiful and willful Duchess who had died under mysterious circumstances 10 years past. Some said it was a riding accident. Others whispered darker things. He had never remarried, and his reputation for coldness was born in the shadow of that tragedy. "Then you have my sympathy," Eleanor said carefully, "for whatever sorrow taught you to recognize it." His jaw tightened. "I did not ask for your sympathy, I asked you to dance." He spun her into a turn, the world tilting momentarily before righting itself as she was pulled back, a fraction closer to his chest. "And you have not answered my question. Why did you not flee the room the moment you knew he was gone?" The question, so bluntly put, demanded an honest answer. Where would I run to? A woman in my position has nowhere to hide. If I had fled, I would have only confirmed my guilt in their eyes. They would say my shame was proof that I deserved to be cast aside. He gave a curt nod, as if she had passed some unspoken test. "You have spirit. It is a rare commodity in this gilded menagerie. His gaze swept the room with open contempt. They are vultures, every last one of them. They feast on the fallen. You, Lady Eleanor, are not fallen. You have been freed from a fool. The word freed hung in the air between them, startling in its finality. The waltz was drawing to a close. The final strains of music were a swelling crescendo, a dramatic punctuation to their conversation. As the last note faded, he stopped, but he did not release her. He held her there in the center of the silent, watching room. "I knew Lord Ashworth in my youth," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "He was a coward and a gambler then. It seems he has not changed. You are well rid of him." Before she could respond, a flurry of activity erupted at the ballroom's grand entrance. A footman, his face pale and urgent, was pushing his way through the crowd, heading directly for the Duke. He bowed hastily, then murmured something in Castleton's ear. The change in the Duke was immediate and terrifying. The cold composure shattered, replaced by a flash of raw, unguarded fury. It was the face of a man who had just received a mortal insult. His hand tightened on Eleanor's waist for a fraction of a second before he released her, stepping back with a stiff, formal bow. "Forgive me, Lady Eleanor. A matter of urgency requires my attention." His eyes held hers, the gray depths now burning with a cold, dangerous light. "We will speak again." He turned on his heel and was gone, striding from the ballroom with the footman scrambling in his wake, leaving Eleanor standing alone on the floor. The whispers erupted anew, a torrent of speculation, but the tone had shifted. She was no longer a figure of pity. She was a woman the Iron Duke had claimed from the crowd, a woman to whom he had spoken with intense, private familiarity, a woman who had, in the space of a single waltz, become the most talked-about person in London. She stood there, her body still humming from his nearness, the ghost of his touch a burning brand on her skin. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He had saved her, but the look in his eyes as he left had not been one of a disinterested savior. It was the look of a man with his own secrets, his own wars, and a connection to her vanished fiancé that had just ignited into something dark and dangerous. Her humiliation was not over. It had merely transformed into something far more complicated, and she had the terrifying, exhilarating feeling that her life, and the life of the formidable Duke of Castleton, had just become irrevocably, perilously entwined. The morning after the ball, London was a churning sea of speculation. Every drawing room, every club, every street corner echoed with the name of Lady Eleanor Vance and the staggering intervention of the Duke of Castleton. Flowers began to arrive at the Vance residence in Belgrave Square before the maids had even cleared the breakfast service. Hothouse roses, lilies, and elaborate arrangements from viscounts, barons, and second sons, all eager to pay court to the woman the elusive Duke had so publicly favored. Eleanor, seated in the morning room, stared at the growing pile of calling cards with a sense of detachment. It was all a grotesque parody of her debut. They were vultures, just as the Duke had said. Her worth had been re-established by a single waltz, a fact that made her feel both cynical and strangely grateful. Her mother, recovered from her vapors and now radiant with vindication, flitted about the room, arranging the most ostentatious bouquets. "My darling girl, did I not tell you? All is not lost. The Duke of Castleton. It is a triumph beyond measure." She had already convinced herself that a ducal proposal was imminent. Eleanor offered a weak smile. Her mother did not understand. The Duke's motives were not born of affection. They were born of something else, a shared history with Ashworth, a cold contempt for the ton, and perhaps a sliver of recognition for the anger she had been unable to hide. He had not looked at her like a man enchanted. He had looked at her like a man assessing a potential weapon. The thought should have chilled her. It did not. It made her pulse quicken. A heavy, authoritative knock on the front door silenced the morning room. A moment later, the butler entered, his expression one of profound awe. "The Duke of Castleton, my lady. He is asking for you most particularly." Her mother let out a small, strangled cry of excitement. Her father, who had been slumped in a chair, gray-faced with stress over the broken engagement, shot to his feet. "Show him in at once." The Duke entered the room like a weather front, sucking all the air out with his presence. He was dressed for riding, his dark coat fitted to perfection, his boots gleaming. He carried his hat and gloves in one hand. His eyes, that familiar winter gray, found Eleanor immediately, and for a heartbeat the hard lines of his face seemed to soften, just slightly. He bowed to her parents, then turned to her. "Lady Eleanor, I trust you are recovered from last evening's exertions." "More or less, your grace," she replied, rising to offer a curtsy, "though I find myself the subject of a sudden and overwhelming popularity." A muscle in his jaw flexed, a predictable consequence. The ton is comprised of lemmings. He did not sit, and no one dared ask him to. He stood, an imposing pillar of contained energy. "I have come to speak with you on a matter of grave importance. It is of a private nature. Perhaps we might take a turn in the garden." It was not a request. Her mother was already nodding, shooing them towards the French doors that led to the back garden. Eleanor, her heart beginning to beat an unsteady rhythm, preceded him outside into the cool, clear light of the autumn morning. The garden was small but tidy, a patch of London greenery ringed by high brick walls. He walked beside her in silence for a full minute, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The silence was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was charged, as if he was carefully choosing his words from a finite supply. Finally, he stopped by a stone bench, his gaze fixed on the leafless branches of an old oak tree. "Your former fiancé, Lord Ashworth, did not merely flee. He fled with something that belongs to me." Eleanor froze. The words were a blow, sudden and brutal. I do not understand." "Did you ever see him carrying a document, a deed perhaps, or an old leather-bound journal?" His eyes, when they turned to her, were sharp and unyielding. "He told me he was going to show you, that he trusted you with his great discovery." The accusation was veiled, but it was there. He suspected her of complicity. The fury she had felt the night before returned, hotter now, directed at this cold, arrogant man who had danced with her as if she were a fallen angel, only to interrogate her like a common criminal. "I have no knowledge of any document, your grace. Lord Ashworth was not in the habit of sharing his business with me." She lifted her chin. "Our engagement was a matter of convenience between our families, not a partnership of confidences." He studied her face for a long, uncomfortable moment. She met his gaze without flinching, allowing him to see the truth and the hurt in her own eyes. Something shifted in his expression, a subtle release of tension. "I believe you," he said quietly. "Forgive me. The nature of this loss has made me suspicious of everyone." "What has he taken from you?" His jaw tightened. "Proof," he said, the single word heavy with frustration. "Proof that my late wife was not the woman the world believes her to be. Proof that her death and the death of my brother were not an accident. It was an investigation he was conducting for me, under the strictest confidence, which he has now chosen to sell to the highest bidder." The revelation was a chasm opening beneath her feet. The beautiful, tragic Duchess, the brother he had never spoken of. It was a family secret of monstrous proportions. He was blackmailing you. I have not yet received his demands, but he has the proof, and now he has disappeared. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I danced with you last night, Lady Eleanor, for two reasons. The first was that I despise seeing a blameless woman destroyed by a scoundrel. The second," he paused, turning to face her fully, the intensity of his gaze pinning her to the spot, "was to establish a public connection between us. A connection that would force Ashworth to wonder what you know. And what you might tell me." The air left Eleanor's lungs. She was not a woman saved. She was a pawn. A piece on his chessboard, moved into position to flush out his enemy. The humiliation of the previous night was nothing compared to this. To be used. Once again, but this time so openly, so coldly. She took a step back, her voice low and trembling with a cold fury of her own. "You arrogant, unfeeling man, you used me. You made a spectacle of me to serve your own private war." He did not deny it. "I did what was necessary, and I am not unfeeling." His voice dropped, a raw edge scraping against his words. "But I am a man who has lost everything once. I will not lose this last chance for the truth. A truth you would sacrifice my reputation to obtain." "I have already elevated your reputation beyond anything Ashworth could have given you," he countered, his voice hardening. "You are now a woman worthy of a duke's attention. That is the new currency of your life. It is a debt you owe me." The words were a slap. A debt. He saw their interaction as a transaction, a debt she was now required to repay. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice a hollow whisper. "I want you to help me find him," the Duke said, his gray eyes boring into hers, relentless and absolute. "You knew him. You knew his habits, his haunts, his weaknesses. And I believe, Lady Eleanor, that you are far more intelligent and resourceful than you have ever been allowed to show. Help me find him, and I will give you the one thing your ruined engagement has cost you." He paused, the next words falling from his lips like stones into still water. "Your future." Proposition hung in the crisp morning air between them, as real and solid as the stone bench they stood beside. Eleanor could feel the chill of it seeping through her, a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. He wanted a partner, not a wife, not a lover, a hunter. "You speak of my future as if it is yours to bestow," she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. "But what sort of future would a woman have who involves herself in conspiracies and chases after blackmailers? If I am ruined by gossip, I am destroyed. If I am discovered aiding you, I am ruined by association." He tilted his head, that same assessing gaze on her face. "You will not be discovered. I am very good at keeping secrets." The statement was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the cool certainty of a man who had spent a decade hiding his own pain from the world. "And the future I offer is not one of dependence. Name your desire, a house in the country, a comfortable annuity that will free you from the need to marry. A position as my secretary if you wish to use that sharp mind of yours. Whatever it is, once Ashworth is found, it is yours." The offer was staggering, more than generous. It was an escape from the gilded cage that had always defined her existence. She looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the forbidding exterior to the man beneath. She saw the deep lines around his eyes, the subtle tightness in his mouth that spoke of years of suppressed agony. This was not a man who asked for help. This was a man who commanded legions. That he was asking her, a disgraced baron's daughter, was a measure of his desperation. "You do not need me," she said slowly. "You have solicitors, agents, men in every corner of London. Why me?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting across the garden unseeing. "Because Ashworth is a coward. He will be hiding in the places he felt safe. The places I, as a duke, could never go without drawing a crowd. The gambling hells he frequented, the low taverns, the homes of his disreputable friends. And because," his eyes snapped back to hers, "he knows I am coming for him. He will be watching for my agents. He will not be watching for you." The logic was cold, but it was sound. She was the one person he would never suspect of hunting him. The woman he had humiliated, the woman he had cast aside as if she were worthless. The thought of Ashworth, smug in his hiding place, sent a fresh wave of fury through her. He had tried to destroy her. Perhaps, in helping the Duke, she could return the favor. "What would you have me do?" The words left her lips before she could fully consider the consequences. It was a surrender, but it felt, strangely, like a liberation. A flicker of something, relief perhaps, or admiration, crossed his stern features. "I have a list of places he was known to frequent. I need you to visit them, casually, to ask a question here, to listen to a rumor there. You are clever, Lady Eleanor. You will know how to become invisible." "I am not exactly invisible," she said, a wry edge to her tone. "After last night the whole city knows my face." "Which is why you will not go as Lady Eleanor." He reached into his coat and produced a small, folded paper. You will go as a woman on an errand for her employer, a discreet inquiry for a wealthy client, a lady's maid seeking information about a former suitor. He handed her the paper. This is a name and address, a woman who can help you with a disguise. She is trustworthy and discreet. Eleanor unfolded the paper. Mrs. Haversham, modiste. The address was in a respectable but unfashionable part of town. She is more than a dressmaker, the Duke said. She is a master of transformation. She will make you into someone no one would look at twice. Eleanor met his gaze. And what is your part in this, your grace? You are the most conspicuous man in England. You cannot stalk the shadows with me. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. My part is to be the distraction. I will be seen in all my usual haunts, my clubs, the House of Lords, my various estates. I will make it known that I have engaged a private investigator to search for Ashworth. The hunt will be public, ostentatious. While they watch me, they will not be watching you. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. A two-pronged attack. The Duke as the dazzling, obvious threat, and Eleanor as the unseen dagger in the dark. It was dangerous, reckless, and utterly compelling. He held out his hand, not to dance this time, but to seal a pact. Do we have an accord, Lady Eleanor? She looked at his hand. It was strong, powerful. The hand of a man who had held swords, reins, and she now knew immense sorrow. She thought of Ashworth, of his weak chin and weaker character. She thought of her own future, a bleak prospect of being a paid companion to a resentful aunt or a schoolteacher in a dreary town. Then she thought of the fire in the Duke's eyes, the promise of purpose, the chance to fight back. She placed her hand in his. The warmth of his skin was a shock, even through her glove. His fingers closed around hers with a firm, steady pressure. We have an accord, she said. He held her hand for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes searching her face. Be careful, Eleanor. Ashworth is more dangerous than he appears. He has sunk deeper than you know. The use of her given name sent a shiver down her spine. It was an intimacy that both thrilled and terrified her. I understand, she whispered. He released her hand, and the chill of the morning air rushed back in to fill the space where his warmth had been. He turned, ready to go back inside, but then he stopped. One more thing. He is not working alone. He has a powerful patron, someone who would pay a king's ransom for the secrets he stole. That is who we are truly hunting. Find Ashworth, and we find the man who wants my family destroyed. He looked at her, his gray eyes colder than she had ever seen them. And when we find him, there will be no mercy. With that final, chilling pronouncement, he walked back towards the house, leaving Eleanor alone in the garden, the crisp air biting at her cheeks, her hands still tingling from his touch. She was no longer a jilted bride. She was a spy. She was an ally, and for the first time in her life she felt truly, terrifyingly alive. The transformation was astonishing. Mrs. Haversham's shop was a quiet, unassuming establishment, but within its walls a kind of magic was worked. Eleanor stood before a tarnished mirror and beheld a stranger. Her gleaming dark hair was tucked beneath a plain, mousy brown wig. Her fine skin was dulled with a subtle powder, and her posture was altered, her shoulders rounded under a shapeless gray woolen dress. A pair of wire-rimmed spectacles completed the picture. She was no longer Lady Eleanor Vance. She was Miss Eleanor Brown, a quiet, efficient woman sent to make discreet inquiries for her mistress. The first few days were a trial. The places Ashworth had frequented were a world away from the elegant salons she knew. She visited dimly lit coffee houses, dusty bookshops, and a particularly grimy inn near the docks where the smell of tar and stale ale hung heavy in the air. She spoke in a low, clipped voice, asking about a gentleman who had made promises to her mistress, a man who had recently come into possession of some valuable papers. The story was carefully constructed to appeal to the greed and gossip of the lower classes. She learned to read the flicker of recognition in a shopkeeper's eye, the sudden guardedness in a barmaid's posture. She was a natural, the very qualities that had made her an excellent society debutante, an attentive ear, an ability to blend in, a talent for saying the right thing, made her an even better spy. She filed away every scrap of information, no matter how small. She sent reports to the Duke through a trusted servant, a gruff, silent man named Mr. Finch. And the Duke, true to his word, was making a spectacle of himself. The papers were full of him, attending the opera, hosting lavish dinners, his private investigator, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Booth, asking pointed questions in the most public of forums. The Duke was a storm on the horizon, drawing all eyes, while Eleanor moved through the shadows. Each evening after her forays, she would return home, scrub the disguise from her skin, and transform back into Lady Eleanor. The contrast was jarring, but it was also strangely invigorating. She was living a double life, and for the first time, she was the author of her own story. One afternoon, her inquiries led her to a pawnbroker in a narrow, winding alley off Fleet Street. The shop was cramped and cluttered, the air thick with the scent of old metal and dust. The pawnbroker, a wizened man with a heavy brow, had been recommended as a man who knew things, a man who asked no questions and told few lies. She spun her tale about a mistress searching for a fiancé who had absconded with her jewels. The pawnbroker listened, his eyes sharp with avarice. "A gentleman, you say, with papers?" He scratched his chin. "Aye, there was a fellow in here last week, young, well-dressed, but with a shifty look about him, trying to sell an old leather portfolio, said it was worth a fortune." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Did he say his name?" "Said his name was Lord something or other. I don't deal with the nobility, miss, too much trouble. I told him to take his business elsewhere." The pawnbroker leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But he mentioned a name before he left, a man who was going to make him rich, a Mr. Blackwood." The name hit her like a physical blow. The Duke. Ashworth had used the Duke's own family name, a chilling taunt, or was it a clue? "Blackwood, you say? Are you sure?" "Aye, odd, isn't it? The Duke's own name. They say the Duke himself is hunting for him. Maybe this man is trying to play both sides." The pawnbroker cackled, a dry, rasping sound. "Foolish man, you can't play both sides against an Iron Duke." Eleanor thanked him and left, her mind racing. Why would Ashworth mention the name of the man he was blackmailing? It was a game. He was leaving a trail, but not for the Duke's official investigation. It was a trail designed to be found by someone who knew the Duke intimately, a trail designed for her. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Ashworth knew. He knew the Duke had used her, and he was not running in fear. He was playing with them. He was trying to draw her out. She returned home to find a letter waiting for her, the paper expensive, the hand elegant. It was not from the Duke. She broke the seal and read. "To the lady who now dances with dukes. If you are reading this, your curiosity has made you more interesting than you ever were on my arm. The game is afoot. Do not trust the quiet. He is not what he seems. Ask him about the lake house." The handwriting was unmistakably Ashworth's. Her blood ran cold. She had been so careful, so sure she was the one stalking him. But he had been watching her all along. He knew she was hunting him, and his message was a warning, a challenge, and a lure all in one. Ask him about the lake house. What secret lay buried there beneath the still, dark waters of the Duke's past? The letter trembled in her hands. The game had changed. She was no longer the hunter. She was a piece on a board she did not fully understand, caught between two men who were playing a deadly, secret game. And the next move, she knew with a sickening certainty, would be hers to make. But to make it, she would have to confront the Duke with the words of the man who had betrayed them both. She would have to ask him about the lake house. Eleanor sent word to the Duke immediately, not through the usual discreet channels, but through a direct request for an audience. She had to see his face. She had to gauge the truth of his reaction. The summons came within the hour. He would receive her at his London residence, Castleton House, a sprawling, severe-looking mansion in Mayfair. She was shown into a grand library, the walls lined with leather-bound books, the air scented with the faint smoke of a dying fire. The Duke was standing by a tall window, his back to her, his posture as rigid as the columns of his house. He turned as she entered, and the intensity of his gray eyes was undimmed by the dim light. "You have news," he said, not a question. She nodded, pulling the letter from her reticule. "He knows, Your Grace. He knows I am helping you. He left this for me." She held out the paper. He crossed the room in 3 swift strides and took it from her, his fingers brushing against hers. She watched his face as he read, searching for a flicker of guilt, a shadow of concealment. But what she saw was something else entirely. It was a raw, bone-deep grief that tightened his features, a pain so profound it momentarily stripped away all his iron control. He sank into a chair by the fire, the letter dangling from his fingers. For a long, terrible moment, he was not the Iron Duke. He was a man broken by a memory. "The lake house," he said, his voice a hollow rasp. "He wants you to ask me about the lake house." "You do not have to tell me," Eleanor said, her voice softer than she intended. "But if it is a trap, I need to know what lies at its heart." He stared into the dying flames, the orange light dancing on the hard planes of his face. "It is where my life ended," he said. "Not the life of the Duke of Castleton, the life of the man I was, Alexander Blackwood. It was our family's summer retreat in the Lake District, a place of peace, until that day." He fell silent for a moment, and the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Eleanor did not move. She barely breathed. "My wife Isabella was a woman of great passion and great sadness. I loved her, but I did not understand her. She was restless, drawn to excitement I could not provide. My brother Thomas was my opposite. He was charming, reckless, full of life. He understood her in ways I never could." He paused, his jaw clenching. "They were at the lake house together when it happened. A boating accident. The boat capsized. They were both drowned." The confession was a knife, sharp and clean. He blamed himself. He had loved his wife and lost her to his brother, and then lost them both. "I have lived for 10 years with the belief that their deaths were a tragic accident, a consequence of their stolen happiness," he continued, his voice gaining a bitter edge. "Until a year ago, when a man approached me with a whisper. He claimed they had been murdered, that the boat had been deliberately sabotaged. He wanted money to reveal the source of his information. That man was Lord Ashworth." Eleanor's mind reeled. The blackmail had been going on for a year. The engagement to her had been a convenient cover for his continued presence in the Duke's orbit. "He gave me a journal," the Duke said. "Isabella's journal. It detailed her affair with Thomas, but it also contained references to a scheme she had uncovered, a plan by a rival family to destroy the Blackwood name. She wrote that she had proof that would expose a terrible crime. She was going to confront the person. That was the last entry." "And the proof," Eleanor whispered, "was never found, until Ashworth convinced me he had discovered where Isabella had hidden it. He offered to retrieve it for a price. He was to bring it to me. Instead, he vanished. Now he tells you to ask me about the lake house." The Duke looked at her, his eyes burning. "He is telling us the proof is there. He is leading us to it." "It is a trap," Eleanor said, the certainty cold in her veins. "He wants us to go there. Why?" "To bear witness," the Duke said slowly, as if the answer was dawning on him with the light of a terrible sun. "He cannot sell the proof if the person he is selling it to believes it is a forgery. He needs a credible witness to authenticate it, someone whose word is beyond reproach. A duke." "Then he would be there," she said, "waiting for us." The Duke rose from his chair, the iron returning to his spine, the grief banked once more into the cold, gray embers of his eyes. "Then we will not give him the satisfaction of walking into his snare unprepared. We will go to the lake house, but we will not be the ones being watched. We will be the ones doing the watching." He turned to her, his gaze intense. "This is beyond a simple errand now, Eleanor. This is the end of it. I will understand if you wish to withdraw. The danger is real." She met his gaze, unflinching. The old Eleanor, the one who had stood frozen in the ballroom, was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked through the shadows of London, who had been betrayed, used, and forged anew. She thought of her father's weakness, Ashworth's cowardice and this man's relentless, aching need for truth. "I am not withdrawing," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I am with you." He reached out and took her hand, not in a handshake this time, but with a tenderness that startled her. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft, lingering kiss on her bare knuckles. The touch was a brand, a promise, a spark that ignited a fire deep within her. Then we leave for Cumbria before dawn. Journey north was a blur of rolling hills, muddy roads, and a charged silence that was more intimate than any conversation. They traveled in the Duke's plain, unmarked traveling chaise, the kind a man of business might use. Eleanor, disguised once more as the unassuming Miss Brown, sat opposite a man who was, for the first time since she had met him, without his ducal armor. He was simply Alexander, a man haunted by the ghosts of a place he had not seen in a decade. The lake house was not a grand mansion, but a modest, stone-built property nestled in a secluded valley beside a dark, still lake. The mountains rose around it, their peaks lost in a shroud of gray mist. It was a place of stark, almost oppressive beauty, a perfect place for secrets. They did not announce their arrival. The house, they knew from the Duke's steward, had been left empty. They approached under the cover of the thick, ancient trees that bordered the lake. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the fallen leaves and the mournful cry of a distant bird. The surface of the lake was a perfect mirror, reflecting the grim sky above, and Eleanor understood immediately why it held such a grip on his soul. It was a place where the world was silent and memories screamed. Alexander led her not to the house, but down a small, overgrown path that wound its way to the water's edge. A small wooden boathouse, its timbers gray with age, sat at the end of a narrow jetty. "This is where they found the boat," he said, his voice low, echoing the stillness around them. "The journal said she hid the proof where the water meets the sky." It was a riddle, the water of the lake meeting the endless sky. "The bottom of the lake," Eleanor whispered. "It is buried there." Before he could answer, a voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking. "How very clever of you both." Lord Ashworth stepped out from the shadow of the boathouse. He was thinner than Eleanor remembered, his face haggard, his eyes darting wildly. In his hand he held a small, mud-caked box, but it was not the box that made Eleanor's blood turn to ice. It was the pistol in his other hand, pointed directly at the Duke's chest. "You brought her," Ashworth said, his gaze flicking to Eleanor. "Good. I wanted you both here. I wanted you to see." He gestured with the gun towards the house. "They all thought she was mad, you know, my poor dear sister." The words shattered the air like a gunshot. Eleanor stared at him. Sister. Ashworth's sister. The connection crashed over her like a wave. The Duke had gone completely still. "Isabella was your sister." "Half-sister," Ashworth spat, his face contorting with a lifetime of bitterness. "The beautiful, legitimate daughter of the old lord. I was the shameful secret, the byblow raised in the servants' quarters while she was groomed to be a duchess. You never even knew I existed, did you, your grace? You just saw a pathetic, gambling wastrel, a man to be used and discarded, just like she used you. She laughed at you behind your back with your brother in the rooms of this very house." The pain in the Duke's face was a raw, open wound. Eleanor wanted to go to him, but she was rooted to the spot. "She found out about me," Ashworth continued, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "My mother had told her the truth, and she came to me out of some misguided sense of familial duty. She wanted to help me claim my birthright. She told her lover, your brother, and together they hatched a scheme to force the old lord to recognize me. But someone else found out. Someone who would do anything to stop it. The same person who sabotaged that boat." "Who?" The Duke's voice was a low growl, vibrating with barely controlled rage. Ashworth smiled a ghastly, triumphant smile. "The same man who has been paying me ever since to keep the truth buried. The man who was in love with Isabella, who was insanely jealous of Thomas. The man who would have inherited the dukedom if you and Thomas had both died. Your cousin, Sir Reginald Blackwood." The name hung in the air, a final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Sir Reginald, the Duke's amiable, ever-present cousin, the one who had stood by him in his grief, who had quietly managed his affairs, the one who had been encouraging him to remarry, to produce an heir. The revelation was a shattering blow. Eleanor saw it in the sudden, sick understanding that dawned in Alexander's eyes. The monster had been at his side all along. "He's on his way here now," Ashworth said, "to collect the final piece of evidence. The letter Isabella wrote before she died, nomming him. I told him I would hand it over, and I will, for a fortune." He looked at Eleanor, his eyes gleaming with a mad sort of joy. "And she will be the witness, a lady of impeccable reputation despite her scandal, to authenticate the entire sordid affair. The new Duchess of Castleton, brought low by the same man who will now ruin the current Duke. He was going to frame Alexander for the theft of his own family's proof, to say the Duke had tried to destroy it to protect his brother's memory. It was a final, devastating betrayal. "You fool," the Duke said, his voice cold as the mountain air. "You think he will let you live to spend that fortune? You are a loose end, Ashworth. You always have been." The truth of the words struck Ashworth like a physical blow. For a moment the bravado faltered, the pistol wavering. It was the opening Eleanor needed. She did not think, she acted. The fury of every betrayal, every lie, every moment she had been made to feel powerless exploded within her. She launched herself at Ashworth, not with the strength of a lady but with the desperate ferocity of a cornered animal. She was not trying to be brave. She was simply done being a pawn. She hit him low, her shoulder driving into his stomach. The pistol went off with a deafening crack, the sound echoing across the silent lake, the shot going wild. The box flew from Ashworth's grasp, skittering across the jetty. They both tumbled to the damp wood, grappling. He was stronger than her, but she had the element of surprise and a decade of suppressed rage. She clawed, fought, and refused to let go. Then Alexander was there. He wrenched Ashworth away from her with a strength born of grief and fury, pinning him to the ground. The fight was brief and brutal, ending with Ashworth disarmed and subdued, his face a mask of shocked defeat. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, breathless, disheveled, her wig gone, her true identity laid bare in the pale light. She looked at the Duke, her chest heaving. He looked back at her, his face a study in awe and something else, something deeper. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he breathed. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horsemen echoed through the valley. Sir Reginald. The trap was closing, but it was no longer theirs. Alexander rose, pulling Ashworth to his feet. He looked at Eleanor, his gray eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive light. "This is not over, but it will end today." He had his proof, he had his witness, and the enemy, believing he was walking into a victory, was walking into a reckoning. The Duke of Castleton was no longer just hunting for the truth. He was preparing for war. And standing at his side, her hair wild, her dress torn, her heart pounding with a love she had never dared to imagine, was Lady Eleanor Vance. The woman who had been abandoned at a ball and had found, in the heart of a storm, a strength she never knew she possessed. A strength he now saw, and a love that had been forged in fire. The lake, the silent witness to his deepest sorrow, was about to become the stage for his final and most brutal victory.